So can you share your screen?
Okay, well, let me just start now that it's actually streaming. So my name here, we'll get the thing started and get going here. So let's see if that actually, yeah, good. So my name's Alex Pentland, I'm a professor at MIT, and I'm going to talk about the sort of technologies that we've developed and are developing, but particularly things that are important right in this instant with the pandemic, and things that are probably good fodder for a hackathon like is coming up next. So as Abdul mentioned, I run the Human Dynamics group in the Media Lab. I also run something called Connection Science, which is across all of MIT. And there are several different countries and large organizations that sponsor us to help them build infrastructure in their countries. So this is sort of what I do for a living, is think about what do the systems ought to look like, what is the technology that best supports them, and how can you deal with things like security and privacy and motivation of individuals, incentives to make these systems work. Because it's not just the technology, it's the people. And so you have to design these things around people, not just for technology. So I'm going to talk about three sort of broad areas that I think are ripe for not only the moment of the pandemic, but also for hackathons. There's three categories. One is governments becoming more digital. Everything's becoming more digital, but one of the things that needs particularly to be more digital and more agile are governments. Everybody is looking at working from home more, learning from home for kids, for elders, for white collars. How is that going to work? Also, we need to educate more people to get them up to speed with these new digital technologies. Things are changing very quickly. And that means that we need to bring all of society along, not just the white collar workers or things like that. And of course, greater monitoring of health. You need to be able to track this disease, detect it when it breaks out, follow it up. And it's not just at the moment. I mean, the pandemic is not going to really go away, even if there's a vaccine. There'll be additional little waves of it, hopefully much less than right now, but it's not going to go away. And there will be other ones. So we have to build better systems for health. So one of the key things in building any of these systems, and this is particularly true for governments, are the problems of privacy and security. So government often holds much private data, as do companies, and these are increasingly hacked. In fact, 70% of all hacks, sort of data breaches, come from people making mistakes. And one of the things that suggests is that sticking all the data in one place is a bad idea. Now, interestingly, the military figured this out 500 years ago. They used to stick all the troops in one big castle with a moat and all that. And then somebody would always leave the back door open and you'd lose the whole thing. And so for the last 500 years, military has gone to defense in depth. You don't put all your resources in one place. And today the resources are data. So you need to keep the data where it's collected. So if it's the bank holds on it. They don't make copies of it that can be stolen other places. The more copies you make, the more risk you have. But how do you use data that isn't in one place? Well, you have to have question and answering systems. And from a human perspective, that's, sort of crazy. I imagine going to the Ministry of Finance and asking questions every time you wanted to know something. But for a computer, it's very simple and very fast and efficient. And so what we've been developing, and Abdulrahman has been a key person in this, is a thing called open algorithms, where there's agreed upon algorithms that you can then send to somebody like your bank and get a certified answer back. And what that does is that leaves the data where it was created, under the control of the people who know it best, and gives you also a record of everything that's asked and everything that's answered so that you can audit and have accountability. So this has different names. One is edge computing, but it's more than just edge computing. It's really this notion of having a data ecology where people who have a right to own the data hold on to the data, and nobody else gets to see the raw data. So keep this in mind as you begin to develop things. Now, this isn't as crazy as it seems because we actually already have things like this. Let me just go back one second. So one thing that happens when you do this is that you can't use the standard AI and machine learning techniques because they always presume that you have all the data in one place. That's their assumption. And that's dangerous to do, and typically you don't own it. So there's now a thing called federated learning, which is something that goes across different data sources. In TensorFlow, there's open source versions of this, implementing things that have names like secure multi-party. There's secure hardware that Intel and others sell to be able to do this. Homomorphic encryption is coming along. It's not quite ready yet. Don't use it yet. But all of these things give you ways of doing machine learning on distributed data. So don't take data off of phones, do the learning a little bit on the phone and then send these sort of encrypted packets to a central place where you just get the answer that you're looking for and not copies of the data. And Abdulrahman can tell you more about this because this is the sort of thing that he's working on. This is familiar to us in various ways already. So for instance, when you go into a store and present the merchant with a credit card to buy something, you don't actually give the merchant your financial data. What you do is you give them a code, which is then sent over the network to your bank. And your bank says, yes, this person's good for that amount of money, and then sends that approval back to the merchant. And that's how it works. And so in the middle is an identity provider like MasterCard or Visa. And what they do is they don't actually get to see your bank data, nor actually in most cases do they get to see even your purchase data, just the identity marker that the bank needs to see and the amount of the sale and who's the money supposed to go to. So that's all that they see. And the only reason they see those things is to get approval from the bank and to route the approvals correctly. And you can imagine now in the pandemic area, the same thing, giving a identifier, a token to somebody that says, yes, I have immunity, I got sick and now I'm better, or I got tested and I don't have the disease. And rather than giving them your medical record, you just give them a token, which tells a network how to check with your hospital. So your hospital says yes or no, and then sends the answer back to the person that you want to let know about this. So to get on an airplane, for instance, you might have to prove that you have had a test just recently. So instead of giving them your medical information, you give them a token, which goes over the network to the test person, the hospital, for instance, and the answer comes back so that you can safely get on an airplane. Now you can imagine doing this for many different things, not just for finance data or health data, but for government data, for telecoms data, for all sorts of data. And that's called digital identity. So this is a network, that identity provider, that helps you get approvals of the things that you claim to be true. You claim to have had a test, it was negative, you claim to have this amount of money, you claim to be you. You claim to be more than 21 years of age. All of those things need approval, but it isn't like the data needs to be in one place, it just needs to get routed to the right person. So that's the principle. Now, what's interesting about this is it takes a lot of friction out of the system. So McKinsey estimates that having this type of system in a government, just the government, will result in something like 7, 8, 9% growth in GDP and overall wealth within a decade. That's a huge, huge gain. And so what it's doing basically is making transactions more secure, making transactions lower expense, making them more fluid so that things can happen faster. And as commercial things get onto this system, that's where the growth in GDP goes, because a lot of things are just too expensive today or too risky to be able to do, because you don't really know that the person has money, you don't really know that the person's healthy, you don't really know that they're more than 21 years of age, whatever. And this gives you a secure way of proving things, of identifying that things are true without sharing data. So without the risk to security or privacy. So again, you know, we can talk about this. Abdulrahman knows a lot about it since he works on this. I think it's really, really interesting. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing is more working and learning at home. So today, in most countries, you have a lot more work from home. The kids are home, they're not in school. We can see this happening again and again. We need to learn how to do this better. Not only is it cheaper in the sense that you don't have to have all those big office buildings, but it also can be safer. So we all think of having a digital office a little like this, you know, a table with a computer on it and a comfortable chair. But that isn't the way it has to be. This is another vision of it that Hiroshi Ishii at our lab envisioned quite some years ago, where in fact it's combining a camera plus a touch screen, big touch screen, so that you can have something that's like a virtual piece of glass where you can see the other person. They can point to things, you can draw things together. It's like a whiteboard, except that it's transparent. And it makes that human connection for communication much, much better than today's digital whiteboards or video conferencing, because you get both of them aligned in the same way. So that's a really sort of interesting and easy thing to do, but it can be really transformative. Let me show you some other examples of this. So this is teaching people to play music. So you'll have your hands on a piano or an instrument, and you can see the reflection up there of another pair of hands, but those aren't your hands, those are your teacher's hands. So you can see how your teacher plays it, and you can, of course, see, the teacher can see the student can see the teacher. So it's like they're sitting across from each other and can see each other playing the instruments. So it's really interesting to think about what else can you do. So music is an obvious one in this sort of extended reality. It's not anything that's really radically new technology. It's a new interface. Even simpler things turn out to work really well. Like, for instance, we have a spin-off company called Riff, which provides feedback to small groups of people about who's interrupting who's speaking too much. So that little thing in the middle there is a display that shows how much each person talks. So if you talk too much, that purple ball moves towards you. If you don't talk at all, it moves away from you. So what that does is that gives people this sort of ambient feedback, this little nudge that they're supposed to stay engaged, that they're not supposed to talk too much. And science shows that if you have a nice even conversation where everybody participates, that means the ball is in the middle, then you can get to results much better. You can decide things better. Everybody feels more included. So it works better. The very simple thing is just showing how much each person is talking, which is a trivial piece of audio processing. We've used this in online courses. For instance, we did a course for the Government of Canada trying to help plumbers and builders and mechanics become more digital, to learn to use AI. And we used this sort of thing in those courses. And what we found is we got tremendously better results at helping these conventional small business people become digital. Now, there was more than just the who talked how much in there. We also kept track of other sorts of things. And you can, of course, read about it if you go to Next Canada. But it's really important because we need to get the whole culture, the whole society, much more digital, much more up to speed about using data, about using digital than it is today. We also find that kids love this, particularly kids sort of 8 to 10, because they're not engaged with online learning at all. They feel like it's sort of silly. But having this little thing that helps them with turn taking and etiquette makes them much more interested. And in particular, girls love it because they're attuned to the social thing. And kids with autism, people that aren't very social, love it because it gives them some rules for actually behaving with other people. So again, a simple thing you can do with conventional tools, but adding different types of feedback to them. Another thing that's, of course, clearly important is health. Today we have, of course, the disease, but one of the things that's actually even more important is the mental health of people. People who don't get out and interact tend to be depressed, tend to be stressed. People who are not rich, poor people, have a lot of stress in this area. How do they get information? How do you do things? And we've built several tools for this. I'll just show you a couple. So Ginger.io is something that keeps track of how much socialization, how much activity you have, your sleeping track. But it also gives you mental health support. So if you push the button, you'll talk to a human guaranteed within 60 seconds. So if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, you can just push the button and talk to somebody. And that somebody knows that you haven't been sleeping, knows that you haven't been out, knows whatever, because you can share that data with them off of your phone. So it's getting a much more informed sort of discussion, and it works dramatically better. And in the last month or so, they've added something like 2 million people to their service because people are indeed depressed and stressed. 20 years ago, I helped set up a company called Damagi.com, which does the same types of things, but for poor rural societies. So this is mostly in East Africa and India. And nurse midwives go door to door and talk to families with young kids and can bring up their medical records, talk to them, make them recommendations, make them appointments with doctors, make them appointments for testing, deliver medical help to them where they live, and get them approval. Because for many poor people, the whole medical system is inaccessible. They don't know how to get there. They don't know what exists. They don't know what the right thing to do is. There's all rumors about all sorts of things. And so having this personalized information source brought to your house by somebody who is a young woman who's a health worker turns out to have dramatic improvement in infant mortality, in family health, and in many countries in Africa in particular, and also in parts of India, has been tremendously important in containing COVID-19, the pandemic. So those are all sort of simple ideas, actually. They're not complicated. It's complicated to deploy them at scale, but to demonstrate them, they're not so complicated as ideas. A final idea I want to mention is something that we've just recently done, which is contact tracing. So when you get sick, if you get sick, and you go to the doctor will say, well, who did you maybe infect? And you have to remember, well, who did I have lunch with for the last 2 weeks? Which is impossible. Nobody can do that, particularly when you're sick. But your phone knows where you were, particularly easily if it's Android, but also in iOS. I'd recommend starting with Android because it's much simpler. But it can show you all the places you've been in the last 2 weeks. So that helps you remember who you might have been and had lunch with or dinner with or spent time with. And that can help you save them because now you can tell the doctor who might have been infected. That's called contact tracing. So it's a very simple digital tool. There's actually an online version of this that's open source that you can get. Obviously, it's all in English, and it may have other things that need to be localized for your context. But it can make contact tracing and suppression of the disease, finding and suppressing the disease, much, much better than it would otherwise be. So here are some things that you might want to look at. This year, we again ran a big event in Davos, sponsored by the Tatas and the Forbes, and we had leaders from around the world, 500, come and talk to us about what they were doing for health, for outreach, for better government. And we videotaped it all, and it's all online at imaginationinaction.xyz. So go there and you can get lots of ideas. They're typically very short talks. They're not long talks, 5 minutes, easy to sort of see. This was just before the pandemic hit, so the end of January. You might say, well, what the plans then are not the plans now. Well, actually, that's not true. The typical thing that a head of a company or head of a government will say is, we had a 10-year plan and we did it this month. So the things that they're talking about as their long-range plans at Davos in January are the things that they're trying to implement right now. So a good resource. We have a book from MIT Press that's available as an ebook, I think, also. It's about how to build systems like this and what are the legal and software infrastructure, so trusted data. And a new book, which is available free online at this URL, about building the new economy. So this is ways to use this technology to build a better economy, build a better health system, build a better legal system, all there. And I think it's really interesting. So let me just stop there and go back to the video and have a conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy, for your insightful information and presentation. So we're still waiting for your questions. Please submit your questions using the Q&A box. I'll read them to Sandy so he can answer them. Sandy, I just want to ask you start the conversation about so right now we like when you follow the news, you see all the brick and mortar retail stores are filing bankruptcies, where other companies in the market are seeing tremendous growth and tremendous business, such as like Netflix, Amazon, and Apple. So do you think we will see a shift in the economy in the next few months to a year where we'll see a dramatical change in the economy where every...
Absolutely. Okay. So there's a lot of things that, you know, have been sort of weak in the economy for a long time. So little tiny stores that are just barely making it go. Medicine has been sort of weird because they don't use telemedicine at all, right? You have to go to the clinic, sit with a bunch of sick people for hours. It's crazy, right? And so what the pandemic has done is broken the habits, forced people to do it the more efficient way. So telemedicine, food delivery, as opposed to everybody goes out. Some of it's bad, like we'd like to have restaurants, but I think restaurants will have to change the seating and things like that as we go forward. There'll be a lot more of this health monitoring to sort of see what's going on. People will just get used to it. For government, one of the big things that has to happen is government has always been inefficient. It's been incoherent. So what one ministry does doesn't match the other ministry. And so I think this will be forcing government to become much more efficient. So a way to think about that is having a single portal for each person where you can see all your government services, and all of those services, they don't have to ask you for identity each time. They don't have to ask you for information because you can share the data that you put in one place in another place. And you can see what data they have about you, right? So that you can check that it's correct. And if it's distributed like that, that's pretty safe. What's not safe is one, mega ministry of government that knows everything about you. So you want to have the current ministries just as they are, but able to share data with each other to help the customer, the citizen, do what they want to do. The other thing that you see in government, which is probably not quite as important for Kuwait or the US, but is this big move to more mobile. So in most parts of the world, it's impossible to go to a government office or a hospital without a lot of work. But you always have a mobile phone. Even very poor places now have mobile phones. It's also something that's fairly simple and cheap to distribute to people. And so having a portal on your mobile phone for all your government services, health, tax, payments, banking, suddenly becomes even more important than it was before. And so I think that that's the type of thing you're going to see. And yeah, the small stores are going to have a problem. What I would hope is that, not that they'll go out of business, I hope they stay in business, but that some of the delivery services become much more agile, cheaper, because currently they charge way too much money. I mean, if Amazon can do this for a flat fee of, $50, $100, whatever, for everything, why can't all the restaurants do it for a flat fee so that you can get things to your house and have it be safe? Right?
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions here, and I also know that you advise a lot of governments, and you also speak every year at World Economics Forum. So we have a question that's really relevant. We always talk about these are big challenges, and always scalability and adoptions are big challenges when it comes to implementation. Can you share some of your insights or thoughts about how we can make this easier in terms of adoption and scalability?
Yeah, so I talked about digital identity, right? And how that would grow the economy. That's primarily what it does. If it becomes easy for you to have credentials that show who you are, that you can pay it or not, that you can share exactly the data you need and only the data you need with people in a certified, trusted manner, suddenly all sorts of things become much, much easier than they used to be. And one of the things about a system like that is that you can audit it. You know where the data goes. And that means you can detect fraud much, much, much better than you can today. So that's key. The long, big picture is that we've all been fascinated with the internet. But the internet is really just a communication medium. It doesn't you can't sign legally binding contracts in most countries over the internet. You have to have a piece of paper also. You can't, it has a lot of fraud. It really doesn't support logistics chains, financial transactions. And this is why things like Amazon build these little walled gardens. So within their walled garden, you can have great efficiency, but then it's hard to get in unless you buy onto Amazon's terms. Imagine that the internet was now a transaction medium as opposed to a communication medium. So anybody could do what Amazon does without having to deal with Amazon. And you could use pieces of their services, right? Because you could set up transactions with them And it would be a much more distributed system as opposed to a winner-take-all type of a system. So this is sort of the subject of this Building a New Economy book, is how to actually build that. And so key to it is digital identity. The other sort of key is having digital currency, digital finance. And credit cards, yeah, but they charge several percent for transactions. That's crazy. It's got to go down to about zero. And as that happens, you're going to get a lot more. So those two things, right? And they help each other.
Gotcha. So we have actually two questions about democratization of data. What are the best approaches to that? Is it top bottom, bottom up? What are your thoughts, concerns, insights that you can share with us about how to balance sharing data and the trade-off between data and privacy?
So the reason I often go to Davos is some 15 years ago, I started the conversation that promoted the European privacy regulation, GDPR. So I had something called the New Deal on Data that I proposed, which was that people have ownership rights over their data. So you can know what happens to your data and you can control it. It's not like you own it, like you own, say, objects, but it's more like you own rights over it, okay? But that's only a first start. You also have to use that, and it's complicated. So what's a good analogy? A good analogy is money. So yeah, you can have money, you can spend it, but if you're going to invest it or do things with it, it gets really complicated really quickly. There's a lot of fraud. You've got to look at inflation. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. And that's why we have banks, because the banks and investment firms, the banks help us hold our money. They don't own our money, right? They hold it, and they make sure that it's held and treated correctly. So they act for us the way, say, a lawyer would, to be able to manage our money. But we need that same sort of thing for data. We need data banks or data cooperatives. And banks could be the ones that do that, but they seem very slow at this. So what I'm seeing more of is cooperatives or unions come together to help people manage their data, not to own their data, right? But to help them manage it the way I say a credit union would. I also think that the value of data is not money. I mean, yes, there's some money in it, right? Okay, but what really matters to me is, does the hospital give out the right sort of drugs to keep my children healthy? Does the government protect my safety with the right sort of police structure, right? And today, I don't know that at all. And in fact, just having my data, having a copy of my data doesn't really help me, because these aren't individual things. These are aggregate things for the community. So in this new book, I point out that the right thing to do is to have community organizations. This is what credit unions were originally. There was a community that got together and said, let's pool our money to get a better deal, right? Well, today you could take your community and you can pool your data to find out if the hospital is doing right by you. You can pool your data to find out if the government is treating you right. You can pool your data to have better negotiation with Amazon or Facebook or Google or whoever you want, just as labor unions and earlier credit unions had pooled their labor, pooled their money, and gave them more power to interact with the big institutions. And so that's not a thing you can do tomorrow, but actually you can begin today. And there's all sorts of things that you can begin thinking about doing. Once people have rights to have a copy of their data, or just keep a copy of your data. So when you do something online, have a little function that writes it to a file so that you begin to build up who you did what with whom. And then you have a cooperative, a local community organization that provides the disk storage, but also you give them the right to analyze that data, all of the data, the people in your community, for you. They don't own it. They're just holding it. And you say, well, look, here's the things that I've done, and everybody else says, here's the things I've done. And now what we as a community want to know, are we getting a good deal? Well, let's look across all of our data and see. Not exposing it, not giving it away. Nobody owns your data but you. But now you can pool your data to help your community. So I'm sorry to go on about that, but I think it's really, really important, right? This is the same thing as more than a century ago. You got these big companies that exploited labor. So the workers had no power. What did the workers do? Well, they formed groups, first local groups, right, to push back. And that's where unions came from. And you can do the same thing with data.
Do you think that social cooperative, I remember that term that you told me back in February when you came from Davos, is going to be a solution to this issue in the future?
I think that, what I see is lots of consumer unions. There's consumer union things. I see labor unions thinking about this. I see lots of other sort of social entities that are beginning to think about this. And good governments can think about this too. It's like, it turns out that city governments don't know a whole lot about what's going on in their city because they don't have the data. They're not very data-driven organizations. They can set up cooperatives, not to own your data, but to pool your data to ask, is the city putting the buses in the right place? We do a little bit of that online. So for instance, if you go to inequality.media.mit.edu, you can see all of the stores and public places in most of the United States and ask, are there the right sort of mixing between people? Are there, parts of the community that are isolated from everybody else? Are there places that only rich people go or only poor people go? And what can we do to address that? And that's a lot of the focus of the disturbances you see, the protests you see in the United States at the moment, is that there's this segregation of people so that you don't have equal opportunity. And these maps are called the Atlas of Inequality because they literally map out the patterns of behavior that form this inequality. So that's inequality.media.mit.edu. Okay.
I'll make sure to share that on the chat.
It's a cool thing. It's really surprising to people that you can do this, right?
So can you share some of your insights on how to make predictions using big data for businesses or governments, and what are the skills required to do so?
So the fundamental thing is that you have to have a notion of exploration. So it's actually called exploratory statistics is this framework, but people have sort of let that go into the background because they're very excited about AI and stuff. But the big deal is you have to get a bunch of columns of data about things and ask what could be in the data. And it's not just in the columns, it's across the columns. Like every time you see this, do you see that? So every time the person goes to the store, do they get sick? Right, that's a crazy example. But there are lots of patterns in people's lives. And the way we always start is we end up making scatter plots and graphs and doing simple regressions. And then as we begin to understand what those patterns are, then you can begin to do more sophisticated things like machine learning. Because the key to making machine learning or AI work is picking the right features, the right relationships to be able to characterize them, right? That's really what you're trying to do. So a lot of people just think, hey, data, throw it in TensorFlow, comes out, right? Well, yeah, maybe. More likely you'll get something, but it's almost by chance, right? And I know that there's statistical guarantees and stuff, but it doesn't give you much in the way of understanding. It gives you short-term prediction, which can be useful, but it's just short-term. You really want to understand things more. So that's, for instance, what we did for the Government of Canada. We put together a course which helped people understand how to do the simple understanding of data first, and then build up to the more complicated things. And that's really what it is. And people tend not to emphasize that because they're very excited about the fancy statistical techniques like machine learning and AI. But if you look at it, they always say 80% of the effort is in preparing the data. Well, really what they're doing is they're getting to understand the data and selecting the right features. They don't call it data cleaning or something, but really it's that exploratory stuff. And actually, that's most of the value. If you have good features, you don't need fancy statistics, almost always.
Yeah, so there are two last questions. One question is asking about open source projects. What are your opinions on hiding the source code, if that's relevant right now or not?
Why not, right? Always good to start to stand on other people's shoulders. That's why they made it open source, right? You have to pay a little bit of attention to what are the copyright things so you don't get yourself in trouble. But yeah, that's the point of Linux, Apache, Mozilla. Most of the things we do are open source in one way or another.
TensorFlow, PyTorch. Most of my research is actually without open source. I could not have done it. So last question is, how do you see IT and OT? I think it's information technology and operational technology going to get along based on integration and security, since one side cares about safety and the other side cares about availability?
Well, you need an integrated system because neither IT nor OT is actually what you care about. What you care about is secure, efficient transactions, okay? And that's why these different aspects are studied, the OT and the IT, and they have to get along, right? And so that's why people are so interested in blockchain, because it's a secure ledger. And I don't mean Bitcoin, I mean things that are typically more permissioned blockchains like Hyperledger, and IoT, which gives you the ability to relate the digital to the physical.
Okay, and great. One last question. We just
come on, you said the last one was the last.
Yeah, so yeah, let's have this one and then we can wrap up after that.
Okay.
So how can we gain trust of governmental organizations and as developers right now? So as you know, this hackathon is trying to help the government build small projects, and we will propose these projects as solutions to the government. So what are your thoughts, concerns, advice, insights that you can share?
Changing the way the government operates is always difficult, right? But having an example that's a good example that really fits the big problem often is finding the way they think about the problem so that your solution looks relevant to them. I mean, so it's, the government is a two-sided thing, right? There's the people in the government and the people who are the citizens. We usually develop things from the citizen side, but that's not how the government people think about it. So you really need to think about it from the government side and say, this is a solution for you. And that's thing one. Thing two is, don't propose things that are going to cause people to lose their job. They're unlikely to be very excited about things that'll get them thrown out of work. So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sandy, for
a good hackathon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandy. And I would like to thank the organizers and KFAS for KFAS Coded and Agility for hosting this hackathon and organizing this hackathon. I would like also to extend my thanks and gratitude to the attendants and the attendees to this workshop. We will have Bohan Khalid after this, and then we have a last workshop at 8 p.m. Kuwait time. Thank you so much and enjoy your day. Bye.
Take care.